Welcome, friends, for today's live and Integral Body Institute. Today we have a very special guest. Our guest is Prema McKeever, and we will be talking about learning the language of the body and healing developmental trauma. Before I invite Prema, I would like to read her outstanding bio. So Prema is body-based therapist, group workshop facilitator and teacher who combines more than 20 years of experience in Eastern medicine, meditation, emotional release work, and body-mind therapist. Her work is about guiding you in your journey to wholeness and clarity about who you really are. By treating thousands of patients as a doctor of Chinese medicine, she saw how vital our emotional health is for our physical health. Looking for ways to help herself and her patient release stored trauma in the body, she trained in biodynamic breath and trauma release system, somatic experiencing, Hakomi, a body-centered system of psychotherapy, Biodynamics, and many additional healing modalities, including Tantra, pulsation, and bioenergetic chakra therapies. So let me welcome today Prema. Hello, Prema. Welcome.
Hey, Nisarga. Good to see you.
Thank you for joining us for live. And I am not sure if I maybe forgot anything important from your bio. Maybe you can share with us a little bit your background, how this all started. In your bio, you mentioned 20 years of experience of self-healing, self-development, and journey to discover all these amazing practices that you share with people around trauma work, breath work, somatic experiencing, etc.
Yeah. I really think we go into the work that we need for ourselves. There was a lot of unknown, even trauma in my own body from my own childhood. I wasn't even aware of. I just knew I always felt kind of cut off from myself, a little bit not really fully here or landed on the earth. I had many different types of health problems, chronic health problems, migraine headaches, other types of health problems. And so I discovered Chinese medicine when I was about 19 or 20, so almost 30 years ago, and started training in that first as a body worker. And so I did 5-element shiatsu for a long time. And then from there went to acupuncture school and really dove into Chinese medicine from that perspective in San Francisco, where I lived for a long time. So I had a practice in San Francisco and then again in Dallas. And after leaving that to go traveling, I discovered biodynamic breath work. And that blew my mind because I did not know the connection to trauma. When I don't know if it's different now, and I hope it's different now, but when I went through schooling and all those years with clients, not very much was known about the effect of trauma on the body, on the emotional health, the physical health. It was never even part of my education. And so through BBTRS, biodynamic breath work, I started to make that link between not only my own history and what was happening in my body, but also I could see it in the thousands of people I had worked with. Because what I really focused on was autoimmune conditions and infertility and chronic pain. And I'm sure we'll talk about this later on in our talk, but unresolved trauma that's still held in the body is very much linked to things like autoimmune conditions and chronic pain. So I was missing that piece at the time. And so through biodynamic breath work, started to learn that, started to unlock even more in my body what I was not aware of before. And then went into a study somatic experiencing. So I wanted to get a slightly different perspective on it and understand even more kind of on a subtle level, working with the nervous system and the body, because it is more subtle than BBTRS. And then from there, it just kept going. So that's been a bit of my journey now to this point.
Wonderful.
Happy to be here with you.
Yes, me too. I'm very happy to have you as a guest and also colleague, because we co-teach together Biodynamic Breath and Trauma Release. You are in Poland also teaching healing developmental trauma. I was present as participant in your training, so I really appreciate the way you hold the space and your wisdom around the trauma healing of 20 years of experience. So I would like to start this conversation from some basics, because trauma healing is such a wide topic, and often people ask me what really trauma is, and does everybody has trauma? Sometimes people living with trauma but somehow being unaware of it and thinking like, oh, nothing really traumatic happened in my life. I had a good childhood. My parents were loving. My siblings was loving. So why do I think I have trauma? So if you could just start from this basic understanding so we can lay out the base for further conversation.
Great question. It is so important. I think trauma's become kind of a buzzword these days. Everyone is talking about trauma. They're trying to figure out if they have it, if they don't have it, what it means. A lot of things get attributed to trauma that aren't necessarily from trauma. So there's a couple of different levels that we need to talk about. On a most basic level, you could say trauma is the effect of what happened that's left over in our body. Unresolved trauma is when there's an impact that remains within our nervous system, within our body, long after the event happened. So a traumatic event, in one way, can be thought of anything that's overwhelming, anything that's too much, too fast. We didn't have the support around us to manage. Oftentimes, trauma then means that there was this activation of our sympathetic nervous system, a fight, flight, flee response came up, where we wanted to either get away or fight back or somehow escape what was happening, and we weren't able to. And so our system was therefore overwhelmed. And oftentimes when we're not able to, we then go into what's called a freeze response. And that can look like a literal freeze, like a deer stuck in the headlights freeze. That could be fainting, collapse. That can come in dissociation, where we're physically present, but our mind, a part of us is, 5 feet back from us. That was my experience a lot in childhood. I would dissociate in times of intense overwhelm, and that carried over into my adulthood. I was fairly disconnected from my body for a very, very, very long time. And so trauma is the effect of this event that happened at one point in time that still remains within us in our body. And there's different types of trauma. So we all know about shock trauma. That would be a car accident, a rape, a physical attack, being caught in a hurricane or a tsunami, something that just happened unexpectedly out of the blue. And we're pretty familiar with that. And then there's what's called developmental trauma. And that is more, there's a couple different understandings of that. So on one level, developmental trauma is seen as intensely overwhelming, threatening experiences that happened to us when we were very young. And that's different than a shock trauma when we're older, because developmental trauma happens while we're still developing, while our brain is still developing, while our nervous system is still developing, while elements of our personality are still developing. We're much more helpless, of course, when we're children. And so trauma that happens to us when we're small has a different impact. It's still in our nervous system, but it shapes us. My experience is that it shapes us in ways that most of the time adult trauma doesn't. Now, severe adult trauma also can shape us. We all know of probably people who unfortunately have had horrendous traumatic experiences as an adult. And it did go on to change their personality. They may become much more withdrawn, unable to enjoy life, not feeling pleasure or excitement anymore. But that's the vast minority of people who do experience a traumatic event as an adult. Back to developmental trauma. So developmental trauma can be these intense overwhelming experiences, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse that happened to us as children. And then there are kind of more ways that our needs as children were not met and supported. And that can be kind of thought of as developmental trauma, some people do, or it can be thought of developmental disruptions when things like feeling like we have the right to our needs, or we have a right to be who we are, we have a right to our willpower. Those sort of things are not supported in our childhood because of the parenting environment. Maybe we had parents who were really strict, or parents who were really absent, or parents who were really overwhelmed. Maybe they had, many other children in the house and they couldn't really attend to our needs so much. Maybe we had parents who were kind of controlling or manipulative or narcissistic. That leads to different types of impact that remains within us from childhood through adulthood. And that's another way of thinking about developmental trauma. But I really think calling it developmental disruptions helps distinguish it more from developmental trauma, which is more of the, like I said, the emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, or severe neglect. And when we're children, when we've undergone or when we've had those types of experiences, those severe experiences of abuse, neglect, it does change us physiologically. It changes some of the ways our brain responds to stress. It changes some of the ways that our HPA axis, which is our body's ability to respond effectively to stress, it makes changes in that last until adulthood, and it can really set us up for different types of health issues as adults. But I think we're going to talk about that more later on. So Niz, I just said a whole lot there. I hope that made sense. If you want me to back up and clarify or go into any other pieces of that, please let me know.
It's great. I like this kind of first division in trauma for healing developmental trauma, which happens in the childhood, and then shock trauma that can happen in adulthood through accidents or some other events in our life that can be traumatic. So it's a really great understanding to start with these two different impacts on our body, with the first one that really forms our individuality, our personality, even our body types, how we look, how we act, how is our energy forms, versus the second one, which can have a little bit different impact on our life, on our body. So before we move on, I would like to I would like to welcome everybody who is on our call. I see 13 people joined our live. So welcome everybody. And I would like to invite you throughout the live to also ask any questions you have about developmental trauma or anything that we are sharing here today with Prema.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love questions. It makes the talk much more interesting.
Great. So I prepared some next question, and that would be about, also this is something that comes from people sometimes asking me on the courses or sending us email to Integral Body Institute. And the question is about what is the best and safest approach to trauma and how one can heal trauma? What is the journey really to encounter into trauma work?
How long do we have on this talk? That's a big question. Okay, so I don't think there's one size that fits everybody. So, but what I would say is what we know now from trauma work is that there is this, I don't know if it's a pull, it's probably a bit of the pull of wanting relief, wanting freedom, wanting to not feel so stuck or trapped anymore, the way trauma makes us feel. That there's this feeling of, okay, I want to get this all done now. I want to get it all out. There's this overwhelm inside of me. I just want to get it out. I want to get into it. And I hear this all the time with clients. So, and there's also this, I think we have this cultural idea too, that we just got to push through stuff. We just got to make it happen, or we got to just do it. The whole Nike thing, just do it, or just get over it somehow, or just get into it. So there's this impulse within us oftentimes to just try and dive in, to just, you know, catharsis, that we just punch some things. And when we're dealing with actual trauma, not so much the developmental disruptions I talked about before. Like maybe you grew up in a family where anger was not accepted. If you were angry, you were sent to your room. You were isolated. You were angry. The message you received was somehow it's not okay to be angry. You need to go away until you're no longer angry anymore. So you learned how to stuff your anger, and that caused a whole personality pattern to come up. And for those types of people, yeah, learning how to access their anger and punch through something is really, really good. But if we are talking about actual trauma, which again, I'll repeat probably many times, trauma is when there is residual effect left in our nervous system, left over from a past event. And you know what? I think I want to back up and talk about that just a little bit more before getting into this question, because I think it'll help make it more sense. It'll make more sense. So when we have these, when we're going through these overwhelming experiences, and this is whether we're adults or children, our body mobilizes to try and save us. And it's all done on an automatic level. We don't get to pick this. Our body goes into a either wanting to fight back response, wanting to run out of their response. And if neither one of those options is sensed to be available to our body will automatically go into a certain type of freeze response. And that freeze response, again, is automatically done. We don't make a conscious decision about this. So oftentimes people who have gone into a freeze response in periods of overwhelm, they can feel, they can blame themselves. They can feel like, why didn't I fight back? Why didn't I run away? But we don't get to choose. This is all done automatically through our autonomic nervous system. So that kind of freeze response for some of us may look like, as I said earlier, and I'll repeat this, I know some people are just coming on now, like a little like we just freeze. Our body, our muscles get very tight and we can't move and we feel frozen. It may look like we go limp, or there's like a collapse, or some of us even faint. It may look like our body is there. We may even be going through the emotions of somehow doing what needs to get done to get through the situation. But a part of us has dissociated. We're numb. We don't feel ourselves. We may feel like we're floating or somewhere back far away from us. We've dissociated a part of ourselves. These are all really important protective mechanisms. They're there for a reason. So, and none of them, like I said, we get to choose. So we shouldn't really blame ourselves or feel like, oh, I didn't respond the way I wanted to. We don't get to choose in those situations. An autonomic part of our body takes over and does what is deemed to be the best option we have of surviving. And you know what? We did survive. So we did do exactly what we needed to do to get through this horrible, overwhelming situation. I've almost forgotten your question at this point, Nis, but I think what you're asking is, oh yeah, trauma healing. Okay. So sometimes, not for everybody, and this is a really interesting question. Why do some people, two people can go through the same exact horrible experience, and some people come out of it with the residual impact of trauma still in their body, what we call traumatized, but I prefer to call people who are living with trauma. And some people come through it not seeming so affected. What is that? Well, that's a bigger question that we may get to later. But for those of us who are living with trauma still in our body, means that freeze response and that huge level of activation of that fight flight energy, that sympathetic activation, are both still inside of us. So it's like one part of us has a foot on the gas pedal and is like, I need to get out of here. I need to fight. I need to something's wrong. Something's really wrong. I need to get out of here. It can feel a lot like anxiety. Another part of us has that freeze response. There's just something in us that just can't connect. We can't connect to ourselves, or there could be a part of our body we can't connect to, or there can be a pattern, a long-term pattern of chronic pain in the area that's holding the freeze. Maybe there was an impulse at the time, like I'll just give a common and easy example of a car accident. Perhaps at the car accident, and there was this moment where your body, even your brain can't even register it, but somehow your body registered that this impact was about to happen. And there may have been the impulse in your body to turn away, to somehow get away, to turn away from the accident, but you couldn't turn, you couldn't get away. But there's this movement, this freeze that then happens with the impact. And that freeze that happens, that could be held in the neck and shoulders. And so then you have this chronic pain that no matter how many massages you get or trips to the acupuncturist or the chiropractor, just doesn't seem to be budging very much. So there's the freeze. So I'm trying to give examples of how trauma stays within us long after the event. And we can take that car accident example and we can apply it to any of the other examples, I think, fairly easily of traumatic, overwhelming events. And so we have this impulse, and we have this fight, flight energy inside of us, this sympathetic activation of saying, I got to get through this. I got to get out of here. I got to fix this. I got to fight. I got to run. And then we have that freeze. And they're both coexisting inside of us. One may show up at some times, and then others may show up more at others. So we can alternate. We can be stuck in this hyperactive sympathetic overdrive that, like I said, I can show up a lot like anxiety, excessive worry, not able to sleep, digestive issues, panic attacks, things like we just feel really revved up. So that's one way. Or it could show up as that freeze response, depression, lethargy, no energy, different other types of digestive issues, chronic pain. There's many different ways that freeze can show up, or it can be alternating between the two. We can have times of freeze, times of activation, times of freeze, activation. So in any of those three examples, what's happened is our nervous system has become dysregulated. Our nervous system, which governs our immune system, our hormonal system, our endocrine system, all these different systems in our body are kept in a flow of harmony through our nervous system, through the autonomic nervous system. And that gets disrupted with trauma. And so we need to be slow. Trauma is an event that was too much, too big, too fast. And our bodies did not have time to get away and create safety. So some of the key elements in trauma healing, one, is to start to bring back a sense of safety into the body. Slow things down, come back into and that could take a long time to start bringing a sense of safety, particularly if someone has had developmental trauma as well. If you have developmental trauma and then you experience shock trauma as an adult, you have a much higher rate of PTSD in that population because there's so much nervous system say that fast, nervous system dysregulation already on board. And then the shock trauma, higher rates of PTSD. So we want to create safety in the body. We want to slowly start working with coming back into a sense of safety with the body. Because when we experience trauma and we have all these symptoms that are going on, our bodies don't feel safe to us anymore. Yeah? So we want to create a sense of safety in the body. We start working with touching into small pieces of either that fight, flight energy or that freeze, whatever's arising. Start working with small pieces from a place of awareness, from a place of presence. Because if you think about it, all of a sudden your body is doing things that don't make any sense. Why am I so panicky? Why am I so anxious? I look around, there's actually nothing wrong here right now. But I have this huge, overwhelming panic. Or why am I depressed? Everything's actually okay. My job, my relationship, my family, but I'm depressed. So we start touching into small amounts of that either frozen or activated energy in the body. So those are some of the things that we need to start doing, working with trauma. And then we start building all at the same time, start connecting into resources, places that don't feel so bad. With trauma, one of the things that happens is we start, our attention gets very drawn to what's not okay. what feels bad, what's wrong, what's scary, what's overwhelming, what isn't working. And so it's really easy to have our attention always go there. And where our attention goes is also where our energy flows. And so we also have to start working with slowly bringing into our awareness what's actually okay and coming more and more back into the present moment. Because the other part about trauma is that it keeps a part of us stuck in the past. A part of us is still stuck in that event, that fight, flight, freeze energy. So these are all some of the different elements that are necessary for trauma healing. So safety, connection, working with small pieces of activation, contacting resources, things that feel okay, more and more contact with the present moment, more and more contact with our body, becoming more safely embodied, being able to be with our experience in a present way with awareness. These are all some of the different elements that I think are needed for really effective trauma healing. And really importantly, that sense of being in connection. That's where working with somebody else makes so much of a difference. Because in trauma, usually we're alone. There was a severe lack of support. Or if there were people with us, they weren't able to help us. And so being able to have that sense of connection and support with somebody else who's there with us in this journey is so important. Yeah. Oh, I can't hear you, Niz. No, I still can't hear you.
Okay, I think now it's going.
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Great. It's amazing, these qualities you mentioned about creating safety, connection, resources, contacting the body, being present, and being aware what's happening in the present, because I think the part of the trauma is going back to the body. And I really love the topic, the title of today's Life With You, Learn the Language of the Body. So what comes to my mind might be interesting question to ask is why this language of the body is important, and somehow how do we listen to this language? Because the body is telling us moment by moment, speaks to us, give us information. Sometimes we feel pain and we are thinking, why I have this pain? But this pain was probably built up over months or years. Sometimes body started giving us those small messages, or there is some throbbing, or there is some warmth, or there is some sensations in my shoulders that I have been neglecting for years. I have been avoiding it, and it start kind of compressing, condensing, contracting, and over time we end up having pain. So what is your thought about this language, and how do we cultivate this language of the body?
Yeah, that's great. And that actually leads into an important piece for trauma healing is one of the things we call the completion of self-protective responses. So at the time of trauma, oftentimes there was at least the impulse to somehow protect ourselves. Like if I go back to the car accident example, the turning away from the impact, that's an attempt to protect ourselves. You know, I mean, obviously we're in a car, we're in a seatbelt. It's not actually going to protect us, but our body had that primal impulse to take some sort of evasive action. That was a form of a flight response. Let me turn away and try and get out of here. That got interrupted with the impact, the freeze. You know, that freeze was because we're actually restrained in the seatbelt or a car accident or whatever it may be. And so that protective response to run, to turn away, got interrupted. And so then that's where we start getting like that chronic pain. And that's our body speaking to us in so many examples. Trauma, really, in the end, we need to find ways to complete what is left undone, to complete the impulses within us. And that can be, I just gave a shock trauma example. Let's say we grew up in a home where there was, I'll use a really common example where there just wasn't enough. You know, maybe our parents, maybe one of our parents died, or maybe somebody was depressed and not really present, Or maybe there was a lot of kids in the house and there wasn't enough energy for you. There wasn't enough time for you. There wasn't enough feelings of love for you. There wasn't enough just that good human contact of, oh, we love you and we're so happy you're here and we're so happy to see you. And the child, we come into the world, and this is more that disruptions that I talked about earlier. This is less about trauma, abuse, neglect, but more about an absence of just that yummy, loving early environment where you get the sense of, yay, we're happy you're here, we're happy to see you, and what you need matters. So let's say you're a young child, a year old, 2 years old. And of course, at that age, you have this impulse, you want to reach out, you want to connect, you want to be held and be picked up and be played with. And that's how you know that you are a part of this community. That's how you know you're safe and you're wanted and you belong. That's contact through our body. But let's say over time, you reach out and you reach out and you reach out and there's nobody there. Or there's somebody there sometimes, but not very often, and it's not consistent, and it's not very satisfying. You reach out, but when even the person who's holding you, it can often feel like they're not really there. Maybe they're holding you and they're on their cell phone, or they're holding you and they're also cooking dinner or watching TV or whatever it may be. There's not still that connection, that attention that you're really wanting, to be seen and to know, to have that sense of yes. And so the child, we want to reach out, but over time we learn, okay, I reach out and there's nobody really there. And so we stop reaching out so much. And that's another type of way that impulse, that energy to go out into the world and connect doesn't get met. And so we over time can give up on that energy. And that can be a form of this, and we work with in BBTRS, the armoring in the body. We work a lot more with these disruptions from childhood. So we learn, okay, I'm not really gonna be satisfied if I reach out to connect. I'm not gonna get what I really want. It doesn't feel so good. And so then maybe we just learn to kind of collapse back. There can be this collapse in our arms and our chest. It just kind of sinks in. And instead of reaching out for connection, we kind of live with this sense of nobody can really give me what I want anyways. If you think about that, just like if you had that feeling in you that nobody can really give you what I want or need, that can lead to a whole cutting off of your needs, or it can lead to a sense of resentment, feeling of the world's not really a place for me, nobody wants me, nobody needs me, all these sort of things. And so that's another way that our body, we can work with the body, is to restore that ability, that sense that it's safe and welcomed to reach out and connect. So it can be like trauma, it can be developmental disruptions, any of those sort of things. And that's the ways that our body is holding our past experience and can really tell us a lot about what's needed to find more freedom, to have more choices in our life, to be more connected to ourselves, to have more satisfying relationships. Yeah.
Great. So listening to the body to get more freedom, that's really good one, to make actually conscious choices, that we can start listening to body, bringing awareness to these bodily sensations, and choose, do we want to kind of act out from the old conditioned programming, or make a choice to make a conscious decision from more loving and aware space. I think that is also wonderful.
And first we have to become aware of it, because when something like this sets in at such a young age, it's just life. There is no awareness. That's just the way we do life. Yeah. We don't know that we're choosing or not choosing. And I'm not even sure if we're even choosing at that point. But once we become aware of it, then we can work with it. And then that's when choice comes in. Yeah. And it's scary. I mean, if you spent your whole life feeling like I can't really reach out, if I reach out, no one's going to be there, or they're going to reject me, or they're going to judge me, or I'm going to feel shame. It is scary to start to work with that pattern. And it takes a while to be able to restore trust, or to even get a sense of trust that it can be okay. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, what you just shared about rejection is a big one. Growing up, in a family where my father left when I was 5, and the theme of rejection is so present in my life that I often I'm just afraid to ask sometimes for what I need, because that fear of what if the person leave me or say no. So it's a big one.
Totally. I mean, for me too, it's like when I grew up, my mother was not interested in being a mother. And she also had a lot of mental health problems. And so for us, it was like we had to learn at a very early age just to do it ourselves. And so there was a sense of, if I ask somebody for anything, one, they're going to say no. And so why even bother? Because I'm just going to be met with disappointment. So it's best if I just figure out how to do it myself and not ask for any help, not ask for support, anything like that. So yeah, that it can manifest in so many these things that we think is just the way the world is, and still until we start really uncovering it and unpacking it and going into the feelings of it. Because that's the other piece, is that when we're dealing, especially with these early childhood pieces, we do need to give space to allow the feelings, to be able to feel now what was too overwhelming to feel then.
We have some comments also from our listeners, from viewers. We have a comment from Yulia. Thank you, Prema and Nisarga, for addressing this big topic.
Yulia!
Hi, Yulia. Yulia was supposed to come for BBTRS in Estonia. She couldn't make it, but hi, Yulia. We have also a comment from Griette saying, I like the word disruption versus trauma. I think it's much nicer indeed. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it helped us really distinguish between what may have been a pattern that came out of the culture where we grew up. I mean, some cultures definitely are more supportive of children with their needs, and others are not so supportive. I mean, it can be parenting, it can be culture, the environment. It's more, I think, of disruptions that come more out of just almost just a parent passing on their pattern onto their child, versus developmental trauma, which comes out of more malicious, violent acts towards the child. And they form very different responses in the body. Yeah.
Wonderful. In our lives, we often talk also about emotions. I think emotions is such an important part of to acknowledge in trauma healing. So one of the questions I would like to ask is how vital our emotional health is for our physical health. So connection, what is your understanding of connection between emotions and physicality in our body?
Yeah. To me, they're kind of the same thing. I mean, our emotions are in our body. Our emotions are a response generated by part of our sympathetic nervous system. So we have the body response. Our heart starts beating really fast, and we start sweating, and our blood starts pumping, and all this energy comes into our body when we're excited. That's a sympathetic nervous system response through our body. But I think I like for emotions, one of the views I really take from is Chinese medicine when it comes to our emotional health and our physical health, because Chinese medicine had this figured out 5,000 years ago. And really they see how certain emotions, and if you want, I can go through that briefly, impact different parts of our body. Like for instance, grief. They see how excessive grief, meaning grief that is long lasting, that doesn't really resolve, can actually start to cause injury to the areas of the lungs, and cause, this whole collapse in here, and can be linked to different types of difficulties with lung issues. I think I'll start off by saying every emotion, if we think about it, emotions are meant to come up, they peak, they last for a period of time, and then they're supposed to decline again. I mean, no matter how good something is, we don't get excited and stay excited for the rest of our life. Eventually the excitement goes down. Anger is supposed to be the same way. Grief, the same way. It's important to have space to grieve. It's really important to give space for our feelings, our sadness, our grief, our anger. But where it becomes not so healthy for us is when they're not able to come back down, where they go up, and for one reason or another, and there's many different reasons, we could feel a lot of shame around them, or maybe we try to deny them and push them away somehow. Whatever it may be, our emotions come up and then they stay kind of stuck in our system. They don't get to resolve. But anyways, back to Chinese medicine. And so they saw like how, grief held on for a really long time can affect the lungs, how anger that's unable to really be expressed, that's more held in and repressed in the body, affects the liver, which then goes on to affect things like women's hormone cycles and migraine headaches. Repressed anger can lead to all these other different types of health problems. Excessive worry affects the digestive system, which we know very well. I mean, if we have a lot of anxiety and worry that goes on and on and on, that causes our sympathetic nervous system a whole range of issues throughout our entire digestive system. We can develop, things like irritable bowel syndrome or leaky gut, things like that. So there's this constant interplay. There is no mind and body. We are a mind body. And it is a continual moving back and forth between our feelings and what gets released in our body in response to our feelings and how it affects our physicality, and the other way around too. If we are really somebody who holds a lot of tension in our body, but we don't really let our emotions be felt, it's still there underneath us somewhere, but where that tension blocks our access to our feelings, or maybe that tension or collapse can lead to a sense of depression where things feel just flat. We don't have access to our feelings. So it's this constant moving back and forth because we are a mind body.
That's wonderful. It's really a valid point. The body-mind connection, body-mind spirit also, this trinity. We have some interesting sharing from one of the viewers, and I think it can be valid for many people. And I think I will link it with a question, practical question of application of trauma work. So the sharing is, my childhood was a real tragedy. I was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, and my level of fragmentation body memories are extreme. So my question would be, what would be the practical applications to bring that fragmentation to more unity of the body? How we can use that concept of listening to the body language to bring healing to such a disorder?
Ooh. DID is one of the
Maybe we should have another live for that, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, I'm just DID is an extreme, and my heart goes out to the person who is willing to share this with us. Really, the level of tragedy to have in a childhood that brings about DID is beyond an extreme that most of us can fathom, and it's a very complex. And it's not just about bringing attention to the body or creating a sense of safety in the body, because you actually have different aspects of the self that aren't aware or don't communicate with each other. So there's a whole fragmentation that has happened for that person. So it takes very gentle, safe, long-term work with somebody who's very qualified to work in this area to help start to bring about a stitching or a integration of these different aspects of self. So the person who shared that, I thank you for bringing that to this conversation. And I honor the journey that you're on and the healing that you're looking for. Something like somatic experiencing could probably be helpful. I'm starting to learn tracking. Something like very gentle breath work, very, very gentle breath work might be helpful to help start to get more of a sense of safety in our body. But it's also complicated because which self is working with in the therapy. And so it's Yeah, thank you. I don't want to speak more than what I'm qualified to speak on. And so I think I'll just leave it with that.
Okay. Again, I'm checking if we have any further questions from our audience. I don't see any other questions. Maybe if you have any questions to Prema, please ask them on the chat box. We will be happy to respond to them. And in the meantime, I have also one question in my lists. Mental health. How do we regulate our mental health? And I know for myself also lately that, just the times are so intense sometimes that like I need to find that mental kind of balance, mental integration, and I think it's such an important topic in today's world. So what would you suggest on that?
Yeah, I think actually this is where I think it's really good to talk about stress, because I think stress is what people a lot of times perceive as trauma. Now, trauma can be seen as an extreme level of stress, obviously, but what really I think is impacting pretty much everybody. I mean, many of us have not had trauma, but I don't know of anybody who hasn't or isn't always dealing with certain levels of stress. And stress, I think, is the biggest contributor to what we call our mental health. I mean, studies, we now know somebody who has experienced 4 or more what they call high-level stressful life experiences, divorce, death of a close family member, things like that, loss of income, things like that, are much more prone to have depressive episodes. So stress is really the key thing. And how do we manage stress? How do we manage stress? Because our nervous system, this is where our kind of our biology is not so well suited to our current life. Yeah? Because how we're built actually with the way our hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis works, or HPA axis works, that's the system in our body that gives us our stress response. Something happens, we need to be able to respond quickly, signal from our brain goes down to our adrenals, release adrenaline, release cortisol, give me the energy that's needed to respond to this situation. Boom. Okay, we have that stress response, we're able to deal with it, and then we're supposed to be able to relax, hang out at the campfire overnight with the other people in our community, come back into connection, talk, sing, dance, play some music, get some cuddles, whatever it may be. The stress of the day has gone, has passed. Or, so that's basically our stress response is meant for these little, these short-term stresses. But now it's like you get up in the morning, you have 30 minutes to get the kids fed, to get dressed, to eat breakfast, rush off to work. Back when we did go to someplace to work, you got to deal with traffic. You get to traffic, you have the emails, you have the pressure from the boss, you have the timeline. Okay, then work is done. I got to get to the daycare, pick my kids up, get home, cook dinner, Okay, I get 20 minutes with my partner and boom, I'm exhausted. I go to sleep. So we have our old biology, which is not so well. We have a design flaw, okay? Our whole biology is not so well built for the reality of our life. Yeah, most of us don't have an off switch. We're constantly going. If we work for ourselves, let's say, okay, fine, we don't have a boss that's sending us emails, but we have this personal deadline, or we have this or that or the next thing. We never get to turn our brains off. I know that's the way it is for me. My brain does not shut down. I know you too, okay?
Yeah, same here.
You and I are from the same cloth, okay? There is not an off switch. And so your question was about stress. Okay, how to regulate stress. So we have this life where we have to find ways to bring in the off switch. So of course, meditation. Yeah, even 20 minutes of meditation. Study after study has shown if we can just bring in 20 minutes of mindfulness practice into our day, it starts to downregulate our stress response. So meditation, sleep. Unfortunately, stress messes with our sleep, but getting good quality sleep is really important for helping to regulate stress and starting to lower it. But we have to find ways to actively bring back into our life something that used to be very natural and part of living. And that, I think, is our big problem, is that we have lost connection to a natural rhythm in our life. We have lost connection, most of us, to a sense of community, particularly in times of COVID. So many of us have lost connection. Maybe we used to go to like a 5 rhythms dance once a week, or maybe we had a sharing circle we went to, or maybe we had our gym or whatever it was. These aspects of our life that we had set up that gave us some downtime, that helped us shift out of that high going gear, and we've lost that. So how to regulate stress? We have to actively work to put into our lives some of these basic things that are meant to be there, but we've lost connection to in our modern life. So meditation, sleep. I have to say, cut out the sugar, minimize the caffeine. Mm-hmm. I have a coffee addiction as well, so I'm not speaking from a place like I've actually done this one. But study after study also shows that high levels of caffeine are actually, it's horrible for our adrenal glands. It is like trying to beat a dead horse, to use that awful English expression. Good vitamins, vitamin B, multivitamins, things like that we need to do to actually feed our adrenal glands, like herbs like ashwagandha are really good. American ginseng, cordyceps. Those are all herbs that are really safe and healthy for our adrenals to help support our adrenal energy. So how to regulate stress is one. Another part of it is we have to create a rhythm. So regular sleep cycle. Cortisol, one of the things that goes haywire when we're under a lot of stress, our body releases cortisol at the wrong time, which causes us to wake up in the middle of the night and feel wide awake, or feel really tired in the morning, like we can't get up, or we feel really wired when we want to go to bed. That's a sign that our adrenal rhythm is off, that our adrenals are releasing cortisol at the wrong times. And so creating a cycle, a rhythm in our life, making ourselves go to bed 10, 11 o'clock at night. Chinese medicine strongly says you have got to go to bed by 10 or 11 o'clock at night to help support your kidney adrenal system. So there's these things that we have to put in our life to help us regulate stress. Exercise, all of that.
Great.
So I hope that helps answer the question.
Yeah, definitely. I like that you brought also nutrition into it and meditation. And I think part of it for me also personally is nature, being in the nature, finding resource, and having activities also. It helps somehow to take me out of my mind into my body, kind of ground my energy. So definitely, I think if we're dealing with this regulating of the stress, that part of activity is something I would like to kind of add to the conversation, because I think it's so vital.
Yeah, and I think that's where breathwork is so great. Like BBTRS, where the focus is on, we work with small bits of activation, which is activating the stress response, but then we work with deactivation, which is bringing us back into parasympathetic. So that's one of the reasons why I love breath work, because we are sympathetic. When under our stress, we're in this high sympathetic response a lot. And so let's say this is our base. I wish I had a graph here. Next time I got to bring charts. So let's say this is our baseline, like kind of resting place. And when we're in a stress response, we're kind of floating up here all the time. Maybe we dip down here for a little bit in the middle of the night when we're sleeping, but we bounce back pretty quickly. And then we're kind of going up in here too much. So with BBTRS, we're working with activation, but then we're also bringing about deactivation. So we get ourselves closer and closer to this baseline. And so then it's in a way we're showing our nervous system, hey, we can do this. We haven't done it in a while. Maybe it's been a couple of years since we've done this, but we can actually help restore that deactivation cycle in the body through BBTRS, through the movement, through the breath, through purposefully, intentionally working with these levels. Yeah.
Fantastic. We have last few minutes, and there is very interesting question from one of the listeners, and I would like to read it and ask, So the sharing is, hey, I love the conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I have fragmented flashes of what I am assuming are memories of sexual abuse. However, I don't remember it, and nobody else in my family does either. Is there a way of knowing whether these are memories?
Mm-hmm. Um, that may come at some point. It may not. It's really common to not remember when we have high levels of trauma like that. There's a whole when we go through big traumatic experiences, part of the flood of hormones that our body releases to try and deal with the trauma actually blocks our brain's memory processes. It blocks the laying down of memory. What I would say for right now is that work with what's showing up in your body. What I have found working with people is, and this is not just my experience, but many people can attest to this, as we start working through what's held in the body, start working with those self-protective responses, start working with little bits of activation, working with sympathetic and then parasympathetic and sympathetic and parasympathetic, as we start to come more and more into connection with what's happening in our body, oftentimes those memories will become clearer, whether they are memories or whether they're not. But at this point, if you're having flashes of something, that says that your body there's something there that your body is expressing. So I would say, if you can, I know it's gonna be really difficult at first, try to put on, imagine if you have like a bookshelf next to you, and try to put on that bookshelf any ideas about what this might mean. Just bracket the meaning for a little bit, the wanting to understand, and instead bringing curiosity to what's actually arising in your body, working with a therapist. This is one of the places where I wouldn't try and do this by yourself. Mm-hmm. Work with a somatic experiencing practitioner, work with somebody who has experience in working with sexual abuse, just in case that is what it is. And they can very artfully guide you into a safe exploration of what is arising in your body. And through that, you'll get a lot more clarity. For any of us, anything that happened to us before the age of 3 or 4 very often doesn't really get stored in what we consider to be memory, or autobiographical memory. It gets stored in our body. It gets stored in these little flashes of something. Maybe we have a particular reaction to a smell, or we have a particular reaction to something in a room or something like that. Things that don't quite make sense, but our body is storing something. So work with somebody on this, and then you'll get more clear, I believe, over time.
That's a great point. I remember myself going through a similar situation where I, not necessarily had a flashbacks, but I knew there are some traumatic situation events from my life from the past, and I couldn't remember. And going through primal therapy for a few years between 2009, 2012, I started rediscovering slowly those memories, those events, and even events that I thought are not a big deal, actually starting to explore them, going somehow into the experience of it through the primal therapy was a big kind of eye-opening for me to realize, oh wow, actually it was traumatic. Actually, there's something there to bring awareness to and bring it to the light to start working with. So it's great what you said, that just having a therapy or therapist who can guide us through those memories with some awareness and tools to help us to express, relieve it maybe sometimes in a conscious way, so we can complete that fight or flight that is interrupted in the body, that is still releasing all the hormones, all these chemicals that are keeping us in either overstimulated or disassociated state. So that's wonderful advice that you gave, Prema.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that whole thing you just said there, and is about it's no big deal. I mean, these are great coping mechanisms that we use as children. We minimize things. We don't remember. We avoid. We have layers of denial. These are not bad. They were really important strategies that we had as children to really get through horrible things that we didn't have any other choice about. So I think it's always important, because so often I hear people say, you know, they think they had to have like a horrendous childhood in order to be somehow, it's okay to have feelings that I had trauma, or I have stress, or I have things to work through as a child. And no, that's not true. We don't need to minimize it like that. There's so much there that impacted us when we were forming our personality and forming our sense of self, and the sense of other people, and what's the world like, and what are relationships like. I think it's great for everyone to go through a process like Primal, where you really get to dig into a lot of what's there. Yeah, thank you, Stavros. Thank you.
So we will slowly wrap it up, coming to the closure of this very interesting live. Thank you, Prema, for joining. For those of you who would like to follow Prema, I will send a link to her YouTube, and you find it on YouTube as Sacred Inquiry. I've been on your channel personally, and I found it very useful, with a lot of great content about trauma, with a lot of practical meditations and tools to use for ourselves, for daily practice, how to deal with stress, how to deal with trauma, with anxiety. So super interesting channel, Sacred Inquiry. Also, you can follow our institute, Integral Body Institute. Prema is one of the facilitator in our team, one of the faculty, which I'm very happy about. And she's running healing developmental trauma training in our institute, and of course, in Canada, Mexico, and all over the world.
Yeah, and we have our upcoming BBTRS training that we're doing.
Yes, yes, we have online biodynamic breath and trauma release training, 8-month training coming up very soon on 1st September. You can check that on biodynamicbreath.com. All the informations about our trainings are there. Me, Prema, Chetna, and Gitan will be main facilitators, and we are very excited to bring this up to the world. So thank you again, Prema, for this amazing conversation. I really appreciate your presence and your wisdom.
Thank you. I've so enjoyed talking to you. I hope this was helpful for people. I hope people get at least 1 or 2 things from our talk. And it's great to be able to, for both of us, be able to come out and just try to also process of just normalizing this, and hopefully people can see that there's lots of things that they can do for themselves to support their own healing in this work. So thank you for doing your work to bring all of this to the public. It's so important.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. So thank you, friends. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for today's live. I would like to also invite you for next live. Will be on 1st September with also very, very special guest, Eric Edmandez. And there will be talk about 8 essential physical needs of humans. Eric is an entrepreneur, public speaker. I met him in Estonia on a big public speaking event. He was speaking to 2,000 people, very inspired person. So join us for 1st September for the next live with Eric Edmandez. Thank you again for your time, and have a wonderful Saturday evening. Bye-bye.